Welcome back to the Guardian Film Show, purveyors of quality reviews for the age of web video. Pull up a chair, warm your feet by the fire. We've been on these very premises since 2012. I think that makes us dinosaurs. This week's show coming up.
A largely unnoticed victory over the communists has been decisively won in Southeast Asia.
Director Joshua Oppenheimer returns to the killing fields of Indonesia for The Look of Silence.
All like a single police cars going up the road. And of course, you know.
And Rufus Norris probes the aftermath of the Ipswich murders in the audacious London Road. But naturally, we must begin with Jurassic World, which takes the DNA from the old 1990s franchise, twists it, tweaks it, adds a pinch of Chris Pratt, and oh my heavens, feast your eyes on this beast. The doors are open at the Jurassic World theme park off the coast of Costa Rica. And this, it turns out, is a bad thing.
Oh, God.
It means that the Indominus Rex has escaped, and that the pterodactyls are in flight, and that dinner is served in thousands of human-sized portions. Proud to be joined by Peter Bradshaw and the indomitable Shoardosaurus. Peter, there's lots of talk at the start of this film about how no one's impressed with dinosaurs anymore and the park's got to up the wow factor.
Yeah.
And is this, I put it to you, a tacit acknowledgement of the problems faced by the film itself?
I think it's a tacit acknowledgement, or even an explicit acknowledgement, of the problems faced by 2 and 3, basically. The film effectively rubs those out, erases them. But weirdly, this works, I think, because it doesn't try to create a narrative from the second and third film. It just goes back to the beginning and effectively remakes the first film. And I thought it was great to create the all-important transgressive or unnatural lurch, which from the first movie was provided by the existence of the park itself. That hubris, that unnatural hubris, has to be provided by creating some new GM dinosaur within the precincts of the established and normal theme park. Now, that's quite a somersault to bring off, but I have to say I did really like it. I mean, it's sort of silly, it's Spielbergian and wacky and ridiculous in exactly the right way.
Catherine, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about San Andreas and the old-style disaster movie where you look at the cast and basically work out who's going to get eaten or killed first. And this very much follows that template, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can tell that the sort of British girl, who's a bit of a cow, she might go, and the fat guard, who doesn't really have a line, he's going to go.
Evil industrialist,
Yeah,
he's a goner.
Yeah.
In the same way that this new Terminator apparently is harking back to the, you have to just forget that there were 2 in the middle. And I really liked it. I sort of really rather enjoyed this.
I was bored rigid by it.
Really?
I
Why?
really didn't care. I didn't care about any of them.
I'm not sure I cared about it at all, but I did find it very entertaining. I really like it.
Don't you have to care a bit?
Well, you sort of do. I mean, I kind of like the kind of Harrison Ford thing going on with the male lead.
You want to consult here or in my bungalow?
It's not funny.
And I always like Bryce Dallas Howard because she always has that strange. She's a bit of a raptor herself.
Yeah.
There's something kind
That
of scary,
brittle kind of
pretty,
quality.
about that rather gorgeous retroussé nose, especially in profile.
Here she's given a kind of love interest of sorts with Chris Pratt, who is the Han Solo-esque
Sort
figure.
of, yeah.
I thought he was a bit too ripped, actually. In this, he's a bit smouldery. I mean, he just looks at people all the time.
He looks at the raptors,
Yeah.
doesn't he? He's like the raptor whisperer.
I like the raptor whisperer stuff. All that the trained. I thought they were going to go into a kind of Pitch Perfect style kind of a cappella group. Those raptors, they're absolutely amazing. He had them absolutely down.
The 2 kids. And again, I didn't care about the 2
That
kids.
was a problem. I mean, that was a real problem. The little one was very irritating and too fat, and the older one was just a lech. This sort of pervy, lecherous little mute creep. It's a strange choice.
And the idea that Bryce sort of thinks, "Wow, actually, you are good looking." When she first sees him,
Yeah,
I
he's
thought that's a little bit much. I thought, is that the love interest? Wow, we really are smoking,
Your
aren't we?
nephew.
This is the real 21st century Jurassic World.
Haven't you grown?
Wow.
We're gonna have to jump. I can. Are you ready? 1, 2, come on.
Ah! Jurassic World there. Time now to turn to another sequel of sorts. The Look of Silence is the companion piece to Joshua Oppenheimer's devastating documentary, The Act of Killing, targeting the collective blindness surrounding the Indonesian genocide. Henry Barnes sat down to discuss the crimes of the past with the director.
Jadi kepiye mak perasaan mama tinggal cerek di antara pembunuh anak mama. Tiap hari mama ndelok raye wong iku.
Rasanya nggak enak. Lewat-lewat iku pun dek petuk pun aku dek pun nggak negara mau buan jiku setengah mati. Benci aku.
I think The Look of Silence, although it's highly dramatic somehow because of the confrontations that form its spine, it is a kind of backward-looking poem, somehow composed in memoriam, even to all that's destroyed, not just to the dead who obviously can never be wakened, but are haunting the silent spaces in which the survivors and everybody in Indonesia lives. But more importantly, it's a poem composed in memoriam to the lives that are broken by 50 years of fear and silence.
Kalau orang sini, orang kampung sekarang Bapak itu takut sama Bapak.
Orang dari tempat itu orang pun nggak tahu. Tapi orang tuh tahu. Kalau dia lawan macam saya ini kata orang tempat semua.
Kalau abangku itu orang yang dipotong juga.
Adi's hoping they will acknowledge what they did was wrong so that he'll be able to separate their humanity from their crimes and forgive the human being and then have some form of reconciliation with his neighbors. And the perpetrators are unable to give Adi that apology, I think because they are afraid. And I don't think they're afraid of Adi, and I don't think they're afraid of me. I think they're afraid of themselves, of their own conscience, of the mirror, the moral mirror that is Adi's questions. And they react defensively because of the fear and the guilt. They react with anger. When he said he hoped this process would lead to reconciliation with his neighbors, I said to him, I'm afraid that's unlikely to happen. I think what will happen is that they will be frightened by their own guilt, and they will get angry and threaten us. But if we can successfully show why these confrontations fail to elicit the apology you're hoping for, if I can film this in such a way, I told him, that I can document what I felt would be the rich, complicated, very human reactions of the perpetrators, then we would be able to make visible something every Indonesian feels each and every day of her life, which is the abyss, the invisible abyss of fear, guilt, and for the perpetrators, fear of guilt.
Seandainya aku berbicara di era Orde Baru sama Bapak, apa yang akan Bapak lakukan dengan aku?
Nggak bisa kita bayangkan ya.
Catherine, apologies for the very tasteful link between Jurassic World and The Look of Silence. This is a much more sober approach, isn't it, than he used in The Act of Killing, but it's none the worse for that.
No, it's an extraordinary film. What The Act of Killing was all about was he started to make a film about the victims of the genocide and their families, and then he found that the people who perpetrated the torture were sort of proud of it and willing to talk about it in this interesting way. And that's what made The Act of Killing so audacious and so shocking as a film, so sort of grabby. This is a much more sort of conventional film in many ways. And actually for me, although this is an exemplary documentary, it's fantastic, it's beautifully made, it's incredibly powerful, it's wonderful, it doesn't for me have quite the same punch because of that, because you're used to the story a little bit, and because it
doesn't have the, well, I mean, we should say it doesn't have the kind of the great fantasy reenactments that The Act of Killing had, which were so horrific and startling and audacious.
Yeah, and for me still, I think the most compelling parts of this one are the bits in which it's most similar to Act of Killing. So when the people who've been reenacting and telling Oppenheimer about the killings, they sort of turn on him and they say, I wanted to have you here, Joshua, but I'm not sure I like you now, or something like that. And that for me was the most interesting bit. The central family, it's incredibly tragic and it's incredibly gripping, but it's more conventional.
It probably takes an outsider to come into Indonesia and to lift the lid on this, but in doing so, he has endangered all the people that he's working with. A lot of them, they're anonymous. Adi Rakun, the central figure, has had to now move away from his neighbourhood.
Yeah, so I mean, what is most disturbing is when he confronts the general of the Commando Aksi that did all this. He starts saying, well, this could all happen again, you realise. Yes, keep going with your communist thing. And you realise that it is extraordinary as an example of historical or even tragic investigations, in that nobody's changed their minds, nobody's worked out a kind of Nuremberg defence. They just think it's just exactly as it was in 1965. We see this extraordinary gerontocracy of tyranny who are completely, as I've just said, in absolutely unable to see why on earth they should be questioned in the first place.
You mean the communists themselves asked to be killed?
Some of them. And some of them want to be killed, and now gave me a chance to say goodbye to all of my relatives, and the next morning I'm ready to be killed.
The superb look of silence there, and the crimes of the past also provide the wellspring for our next film, London Road, spun out of an acclaimed stage production and daring to tackle the 2006 Ipswich murders via the medium of song.
Everyone is very, very nervous. We all wanted to move. We didn't want to be here.
Every house in London Road.
In 2006, Ipswich local Steve Wright was charged with the murder of 5 sex workers on pebble-dashed London Road. Rufus Norris and Alec Blythe's startling piece of verbatim theatre gives a voice and music to the residents as they attempt to make sense of the horror and clean up the street. Peter, it's a bold approach that could have gone horribly wrong, and yet I thought this was kind of brilliant.
I absolutely agree. I thought it was totally brilliant, utterly gripping, utterly macabre, but very moving. I think it's one of the best British films of the year, one of the best films of the year, hands down. I must admit I haven't seen the original stage show, but it found a way of talking about this that you'd never get on the TV news, and you'd never get with a forensic thriller. You never get it in Broadchurch, you wouldn't get it in Borgen or anything like that. It's found a way of really talking about it, and especially talking about the people who are never talked about, that is to say the people that lived around about, and making them the centre of the story. I must say, I was absolutely gripped by it. It's extraordinary. Alec Blythe's lyrics, the way she's, with personal interviews, she's kind of almost like a DJ, sampled these macabre phrases and brought out that kind of stagger, this weird stuttering poetry that comes in. I was on the edge of my seat all the way through, and the final scene, the flower show scene, is stunningly moving in a way that I just can't describe. I can't describe why it is so moving, but it is. What a brilliant film. Absolutely superb.
It's interesting Peter saying it's compassionate. I found it kind of chilling in its portrait of the community. And I mean, and Peter's not alone. I mean, the news stories around this seem to be how, the street got its pride back and it's celebrated in this film. But actually, as a portrait of a community, it's pretty damning at times, isn't it?
It's demonising, I think. I don't think it's damning. I think it's demonising. I think it's patronising. I'm afraid I'm rather a dissenting voice in this. I think I couldn't shake off my queasiness about this. I went in a bit queasy, I'm afraid, but I just couldn't shake it off. I can see it's technically impressive. I can see why people think it's good. I can see why it is good. However, not only is there this sort of lingering issue that the real victims aren't necessarily these people, but the fact that these people are demonised. It's Little Britaning them. You don't see this anywhere, but you could see it on a documentary. You could actually just show the people being interviewed, and they are caricatured in the way that they're performed. They just are. And, it pushes the point that people have a sort of bloodlust and a tabloid sort of hunger for this kind of story.
I don't think it's caricatured or demonised, but I think it's stylised and strange and estranged and alienated, and I think that is what it is. They don't look normal because they are singing this weird oratorio. I don't agree with Catherine that they're demonised. I don't agree, but it is interesting that this film kind of goes behind enemy lines and says this is what they're all thinking, and yet I feel at the end that they're not demonised, that they have said that they've exorcised and catharsised these awful thoughts, that they sort of feel glad that the murderer came along, and then they're not glad. They genuinely are horrified.
Filmmakers would presumably say that this is their words, this is what they were saying.
It's their words, certainly, absolutely, but that's, they're repeated and they're stylised and they're acted in a certain way.
Presumably.
And edited, So I don't think that's quite enough. I also sort of can't shake off the sense that this is a lower middle class community.
Yeah, there is definitely that.
And it's a
and it's
national
middle class
theatre.
actors doing the kind of talking like that.
I know, and you know, you go and see this at the National Theatre, and I know this is inverse snobbery, and this is not a good, fair thing to think, but something about that also made me a bit uneasy, I'm afraid. Sorry.
We just want to see an end. London Road getting back to being London Road.
Run, don't walk to London Road. And that's it from us. My thanks to Catherine and to Peter and to you for watching. By rights, I think we should probably go out with a song. Do you want to oblige?
I don't really think that would be appropriate in the light of the context of this critical discourse to pastiche the film. Not appropriate. Not
Lower
appropriate.
middle class.
Lower middle class. I disagree.